Hello and welcome back to the Smash Archive, the series where we look at every franchise in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. For this episode, we'll be taking a deep dive into the first third-party company to have their content heavily featured in Smash Bros, dating all the way back to Brawl's E3 2006 trailer, that company being KONAMI. Now, given some of the games we'll be going over today can get pretty story heavy, I'm going to give a preemptive spoiler warning for everything we'll be discussing today. Specifically, we'll be doing deep dives into the Metal Gear series, focusing on Metal Gear 1 and 2, Metal Gear Solid 1 through 5, as well as Portable Ops and Peace Walker, followed by the Castlevania series with near enough every mainline entry from the original Castlevania up to Lords of Shadow, and then end off with brief overviews of Bomberman, Ganbare Goemon, and Getsu Fuma Den. In addition to these, there is actually one more KONAMI franchise with the Power Pro series, but that is going to be saved for a bonus episode alongside the other spirits that were added to celebrate Ultimate's 5th anniversary. With all that underway, let's start this mission off with Metal Gear. In the mid-80s, a recently hired planner for KONAMI called Hideo Kojima was brought in as a replacement director for a planned modern military action game which was set to release for MSX2 computers, which was struggling due to hardware limitations for the computer, making it hard for the game to run properly when too many bullets were on screen, along with the limited screen scrolling capabilities making it near impossible for them to make a scrolling shooter. Taking these issues at hand, in addition to some inspiration from the 1963 film The Great Escape, Kojima would re-envision the game to instead focus around having to sneak by enemies and take them out from a distance to avoid being captured. The final result would release in 1987 under the name Metal Gear, the title following Solid Snake, an operative for the Special Forces unit Foxhound, having to complete a solo mission to infiltrate a fortified state called Outer Heaven and destroy the TX-55 Metal Gear, a bipedal tank equipped with nuclear weapons which it can launch anywhere across the world. Whilst not necessarily the first of its kind, Metal Gear is still viewed as a pioneer within the stealth game genre, with it managing to stay in the top 20 best-selling MSX games in Japan for 5 months, with the later NES port of the game managing to sell over 1 million copies in the US alone, with it also ranking as the second best-selling game in America during October of 1988, only being outperformed by Super Mario Bros. 2. Much like a lot of the franchises featured in Smash, given that this was the first game in the series, there's a good amount of content from the original Metal Gear. First, we have fighter number 31, Snake, the main protagonist of the Metal Gear series, acting as the lead for Metal Gear 1 and 2, as well as Metal Gear Solid 1 and 4, serving as an infiltration specialist for Foxhound under the codename Solid Snake, constantly finding himself involved in stopping terrorists attempting to utilize Metal Gears, despite repeated attempts to retire. His appearance in Smash is based on his look in Metal Gear Solid 2, where he takes the role of a supporting character following the game's prologue. Next is a music track with a Brawl remix of Theme of Tara, the game's main theme, which starts with the opening jingle from when Snake reaches Outer Heaven. Then there's the assist trophy, Grey Fox, an operative for Foxhound who is the one that initially warns the team about the Metal Gear on Outer Heaven, though his assist trophy appearance is based on his role in Metal Gear Solid, where after being defeated at the hands of Snake in Metal Gear 2, he was revived as a cyberized ninja, with him infiltrating Shadow Moses in an attempt to fight Snake again. When he's summoned, he'll run around the stage and attack fighters with fast sword slashes, with him also being able to reflect projectiles. Finally, there's 4 spirits. Number 749, Solid Snake, a fighter spirit. The artwork is from Metal Gear Solid: The Legacy Collection, a compilation for the PlayStation 3 which included Metal Gear 1 and 2, Metal Gear Solid 1 through 4, VR missions, Peace Walker, and motion comic adaptations of the IDW Metal Gear Solid graphic novels. Number 751, Grey Fox, a 3-slot ace primary attack spirit. The spirit art is from Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, where he doesn't actually appear in the story, instead just being an alternate costume for the game's main protagonist Raiden via the Cyborg Ninja Armor DLC pack. Number 759, Big Boss, a 2-slot legend primary grab spirit with the effect Metal Killer, a renowned special forces operative and mercenary commander who founded Foxhound, with him being the one who guides Snake through his mission, though at the end of the game it's revealed that he was trying to actively sabotage Snake so that the TX-55 Metal Gear could be finished, with Big Boss serving as the game's final boss during the self-destruct escape sequence after destroying the Metal Gear. His art is from Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zero, a short prologue to Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, where a few months after the events of Peace Walker, he infiltrates an American black site in Cuba to save both a Cypher agent and a former Sandinista child soldier. And number 774, Cardboard Box, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Improved Escape. Cardboard boxes have appeared throughout the series as an object that the game's various leads have used to hide in to avoid detection from both enemy troops and surveillance cameras, with the art coming from Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, specifically depicting a box which features camouflage specialized for use in rocky terrains. After the release of Metal Gear, Kojima didn't really have much interest in making a sequel to the game, though that would soon change when during a train ride, he was informed by a junior co-worker that Konami had already started work on making a sequel, specifically for international markets, titled Snake's Revenge. Kojima having no idea about it, since it wasn't a sequel to the game he worked on, but instead was a follow-up to the NES port of Metal Gear that he had nothing to do with. And after being convinced he should make his own follow-up by said junior co-worker, Kojima quickly wrote up a plan and successfully pitched to Konami his own vision of a Metal Gear sequel, which would release exclusively in Japan for the MSX2 in 1990 under the name Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, where 3 years after the events of the first game, Snake is brought out of retirement by Foxhound's new leader to infiltrate the heavily fortified Zanzibar land in order to stop the area's leader from holding the world hostage by controlling the supply of oil. His specific task being to save Czech scientist Dr. Kyo Marv and destroy a new revised Metal Gear unit called Metal Gear D. Metal Gear 2 would end up ranking in the top 30 best-selling MSX games in Japan for 6 months, managing to reach the number 1 spot in October of 1990, with it having gotten near universal acclaim from retro game reviewers, especially in comparison to Snake's Revenge, which is often regarded as one of the worst games in the Metal Gear franchise. As this is one of the lesser talked about titles in the series, given it was initially a Japan exclusive title and came out before the franchise arguably went mainstream, there's not much from Metal Gear 2. To start off, we have a music track with a new remix of the game's intro song, Theme of Solid Snake. On top of that, there's 2 spirits. Number 753, Roy Campbell, a 2-slot advanced support spirit with the effect Irreversible Controls, a former US Army colonel who took command of Foxhound following the betrayal of Big Boss, with him being the one who brought Snake out of retirement to save Dr. Ma from Zanzibar Land. His spirit artwork is taken from Metal Gear Solid 4, where he's since become a member of the United Nations Security Council to monitor PMC activity, with him contacting both Snake and Otacon after finding the location of Liquid Ocelot and being dissatisfied with the world governments doing nothing to stop him. And number 766, Kazuhira Miller, a 1-slot ace support spirit with the effect trade-off ability up, a Japanese-American man who worked in the Japan Self-Defense Forces to pay for his mother's hospital bills and get a taste of the battlefield, with him being sought out by Campbell to serve as Foxhound's survival consultant, Snake being able to call him for advice on how to overcome various obstacles during his mission. The spirit art is taken from Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, where after being saved by Venom Snake from Afghanistan, he works with him throughout the game to rebuild a private army called Diamond Dogs after their previous private military, Militaire Sans Frontières, was destroyed by the Strike Force XOF. Serving as the series' 3rd entry, as well as its debut in 3D, Metal Gear Solid would release in 1998 exclusively for the biggest console at the time, the Sony PlayStation, with a slight change in title being due to Kojima recognizing that most people outside Japan didn't really know about the Metal Gear games he worked on, as America only got the NES versions and Europe only got the MSX version of Metal Gear 1. The game takes place in 2005, 6 years after the events of Metal Gear 2, where during a training mission on Shadow Moses, an island off the coast of Alaska housing a nuclear weapons facility, a rebel group within Foxhound alongside the Next Generation Special Forces, a US Black Ops squad, end up taking over the island as part of a planned attack against the US government under the command of Liquid Snake, the group managing to get a hold of a brand new Metal Gear unit called the Metal Gear Rex, with them threatening to use its nuclear capabilities if the government doesn't hand over the body of Big Boss in order to create an army of ultimate soldiers, with Solid Snake once again being drafted out of retirement to infiltrate the island to take down Liquid. Metal Gear Solid would end up smashing sales expectations, in the end managing to sell over 7 million copies, making it the 10th best-selling PlayStation game, with it receiving universal acclaim, often being heralded as one of the most important titles in video game history, along with its cementing Metal Gear as an icon of the PlayStation brand, with the game eventually seeing an expanded version called Metal Gear Solid Integral, which released on PlayStation and PC in 1999, and in 2004 would get a full-blown remake for the GameCube with Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes. Due to how unfathomably large a legacy Metal Gear Solid has, there is a good amount of content from this game. To begin, we have the stage Shadow Moses Island, the central location of MGS1, specifically taking place within one of the earliest areas you explore, near a helipad just outside a tank hangar. The stage is effectively just 2 floors sat between 2 watchtowers, which can be destroyed by attacking them. During the fight, in addition to it being possible for fighters to get caught by a spotlight, similar to the one Snake has to avoid whilst going through the area, sometimes the back wall will be destroyed by one of the various mechs from the Metal Gear series, the ones that can appear being a Metal Gear Rex, a Metal Gear Ray, or a pair of geckos. Then we have 2 music tracks, with Cavern, the theme used for the opening section of the game where Snake goes through a Shadow Moses nuclear disposal facility, and a Brawl remix of Encounter, the song that plays when Snake is spotted by an enemy. top of that, there's 5 spirits. Number 750, Liquid Snake. A 1-slot legend primary grab spirit, the man who took command of Foxhound following the retirement of Roy Campbell, Liquid converting the group into an elite counter-terrorist group before forming the Sons of Big Boss to revolt against the US, but then revealing towards the end of the game that both he and Solid Snake are actually both clones of Big Boss, Solid inheriting all his dominant genes, whilst Liquid got all the inferior recessive genes. Number 752, Hal Emmerich. A 1-slot advanced support spirit which lets you start the battle with a beam sword. The chief engineer of the Metal Gear Rex project, who nicknamed himself after the anime fan convention Otacon, having been initially contracted by defense contractor Arms Tech before getting held hostage by Foxhound, with him deciding to help Snake as thanks for saving him, as well as for building the mech in the first place, as he was told Rex was for a mobile defense system. The spirit art is from Metal Gear Solid 4, where he was contracted alongside Snake to help eliminate Liquid Ocelot, serving as his support throughout the game by calling him from their aircraft called the Nomad and a miniature robot named the Metal Gear Mark II. Number 754, Meryl Silverberg. A 2-slot novice primary neutral spirit. A younger relative of Roy Campbell who was serving as a soldier and ended up being brought in by Foxhound as an emergency replacement, with her refusal to join the rebellion eventually leading her to work alongside Solid Snake. Her artwork is taken from Metal Gear Solid 4, where she's now the commanding officer of a USACIDC group, Rat Patrol 01, who have been in charge of a secret operation to capture Liquid Ocelot unknowingly for the Patriots. Number 755, Mei Ling. A 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Energy Shot Resist Up. A Chinese-American data analyst who serves as Snake's radio support during the Shadow Moses incident, giving him information via the codec and offering advice through Chinese proverbs or quoting American figures and literature. Her spirit art is from Metal Gear Solid 4, where she became the commanding officer of the museum-turned-training vessel, the USS Missouri, with her aiding Snake and Otacon throughout the game by sharing satellite imagery of Ocelot's location and movements. And number 769, Metal Gear Rex, a 3-slot ace primary shield spirit with the effect Speed Down. A prototype Metal Gear unit that was initially designed in the 60s but wasn't actually built until the 2000s, thanks to a mix of DARPA, Arms Tech, and Livermore National Labs, the machine possessing the capabilities to launch nuclear missiles anywhere on Earth, with it being viewed as the ultimate Metal Gear at the time of its construction. The artwork is taken from Metal Gear Solid 4, where Ocelot ends up returning to Shadow Moses in the hopes of stealing the unit's railgun, with Snake in turn infiltrating the island to stop him, with Otacon eventually managing to reactivate the unit for Snake to escape in. Initially releasing in 2001 exclusively for the PlayStation 2, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty starts with Snake and Otacon, 2 years after the events of the previous game, attempting to infiltrate a tanker carrying a brand new type of Metal Gear, dubbed the Metal Gear Ray, which then gets attacked by a group of Russian terrorists led by one of Liquid Snake's former allies, Revolver Ocelot, who ends up getting possessed by Liquid's severed arm and steals the Metal Gear. Skipping ahead 2 years, Foxhound operative Raiden is sent in to infiltrate the Big Shell, an environmental cleanup facility built to deal with oil spills off the coast of Manhattan, after the place is taken over by a terrorist group called the Sons of Liberty during a visit from the United States President. Metal Gear Solid 2 saw near unanimous praise, ranking as one of the most critically acclaimed games for the system, the only major criticism the game saw being a split reaction to both the game's narrative, which was much more philosophical when compared to previous entries, with themes of post-truth politics, fake news, and synthetic media, as well as the decision to not make Solid Snake the main protagonist, something that was hidden from players until they had already beaten the game's prologue and started playing as Raiden. An expanded version of the game titled Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance would come out a year later, with this version of the game also seeing release for both the original Xbox and PC, with the combined sales of both the original release and the PS2 version of Substance Innocence, reaching a total of 7.03 million copies sold, in turn making it the 7th best-selling PlayStation 2 game. Given this is another fairly important entry in the series, there's a solid amount of content from MGS2. First, we have a music track with Yell Dead Cell, one of the game's boss themes which is primarily used for fights against members of Dead Cell. In addition, there's 4 spirits. Number 756, Solidus Snake, a 2-slot advanced primary grab spirit. A third clone of Big Boss, specifically the only perfect clone of the man, who served as the 43rd US president under the identity George Sears, with MGS2 seeing him leading the Sons of Liberty, once again hiding his true identity by claiming to be Solid Snake. Number 757, Rosemary, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Energy Shot Attack Up, Raiden's girlfriend who works as part of the radio team throughout the game, the pair having first met outside Federal Hall where they got into an argument about what building King Kong climbed. Her spirit artwork is taken from Metal Gear Solid 4, where despite the two ending up together after the events of MGS2, her and Raiden's relationship would end up falling apart due to Raiden developing an alcohol dependency to cope with the haunting memories of his childhood, with Roy Campbell eventually staging a fake marriage with Rosemary in order to protect her from the Patriots. Number 765, Raiden, a 2-slot legend primary attack spirit. Metal Gear Solid 2's main protagonist, who was sent by Foxhound to infiltrate the Big Shell decontamination facility with the goal of saving nearly 30 hostages, including 44th US President James Johnson, from the Sons of Liberty. His artwork is taken from Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, an action game spin-off developed by Platinum Games set 4 years after the events of MGS4, which follows a now cyborg Raiden taking on a private military company called Desperado Enforcement LLC, who want to destabilize peaceful nations in order to reap the financial rewards of the war economy. And number 770, Metal Gear Ray, a 3-slot advanced primary grab spirit with the effect Wait Up, a Metal Gear unit that was specifically designed with the capabilities to destroy other Metal Gears, technically making it the anti-Metal Gear, with a prototype model of the weapon being stolen by Revolver Ocelot from the USS Discovery, leading to the tanker's sinking. The spirit art is taken from Metal Gear Solid 4, where Ocelot pilots one in a battle against Snake, who in turn was piloting the original Metal Gear Rex unit from Shadow Moses. Serving as a prequel to the entire Metal Gear franchise, and releasing exclusively for the PlayStation 2 in 2004, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater takes place in the 1960s during the midst of the Cold War, following a younger Big Boss when he was an operative for Fox under the codename Naked Snake, which sees him travel through the jungles of the Soviet Union with the goal of preventing World War III after America's greatest agent defected for the Soviets, and Soviet extremist Colonel Volgin caused an international incident by launching an American-made nuclear missile at a Soviet research facility. While Snake Eater wasn't quite as commercially successful as MGS2, reaching a total sales figure of 4 million copies, making it the 19th best-selling PS2 game, it still saw overwhelming critical praise thanks to its narrative, further improving the gameplay from previous entries, and its frankly insane levels of detail, with it later being regarded as not only one of the best games in the series, but one of the best video games of all time, with it later getting an expanded version a year later called Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, a handheld version for the 3DS which came out in 2012, as well as a full-blown remake titled Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is set to come out at some point in the near future for the PS5, Xbox Series systems, and PC. Due to the game's outstanding astounding legacy, there's a good amount of content from MGS3. To start off, we have 3 music tracks, with 2 versions of the game's main theme, Snake Eater, with an instrumental version of the original song, as well as a new remix for Ultimate, and Battle in the Base, which plays when Snake is spotted in an indoor area. After that, there's 5 spirits. Number 758, Naked Snake, a 2-slot ace primary grab spirit which can be enhanced at level 99. A younger big boss who, after serving in both the Korean War and as a member of the Green Berets, was brought in to work for the CIA's Fox unit, where he ended up being tasked to save defected Soviet scientist Nikolai Stepanovich Sokolov, who afterwards warned Snake about how the Soviets had forced him to create a revolutionary weapon called the Shagohod, with the rest of the game following his mission to destroy said weapon. The spirit art is taken from the 2016 Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater Patchy slot machine. Number 760, The Boss, a 3-slot legend primary grab spirit with the effect Strong Throw. A US soldier who was the founder of the Cobra unit, a team of soldiers assembled to assist with the defeat of the Axis powers during World War II, as well as being Naked Snake's mentor, eventually becoming his supervisor during the Virtuous mission at the start of the game, only to cause that mission's failure when she betrayed the team to hand over Sokolov to a rogue colonel of the GRU, a Russian military intelligence agency. Number 761, Ava, a 1-slot advanced support spirit which lets you start the battle with a ray gun. A spy for the Chinese Liberation Army who posed as a member of the KGB in order to get a microfilm needed to access a slush fund valued at $100 billion called the Philosopher's Legacy, with her encountering and fighting alongside Naked Snake during Operation Snake Eater. Her artwork is taken from the Snake Eater Patchy slot machine. Number 762, Revolver Ocelot Metal Gear Solid 3, a 2-slot advanced primary grab spirit which can be enhanced at level 99. Revolver Ocelot is actually a character who's been around since Metal Gear Solid 1, originally serving as a member of the terrorist group led by Liquid Snake, with Snake Eater showing his early days when he was a member of the GRU, encountering and fighting Naked Snake multiple times throughout the game. The artwork coming from the Snake Eater Patchy slot machine. And number 764, Zero, a 2-slot advanced support spirit which lets you start the battle with a super scope. The original commanding officer of Fox, who in addition to serving as commander during the Virtuous mission, also fulfills that same role during Operation Snake Eater, with him being the one to inform Snake about the latter mission, under the implication that if they failed, Fox would be disqualified as an official unit and they could get executed. Once again, the spirit art is taken from the Snake Eater Patchy slot machine. Releasing for the PSP in 2006, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops takes place 6 years after the events of Snake Eater, following Naked Snake as he ends up being kidnapped by Fox Unit after they go renegade in South America and attempt to establish their own military nation, with the hopes of finding the missing half of the Philosopher's Legacy. With the game eventually following the events that led to the creation of Foxhound, albeit the game's canonicity is kind of dubious, as whilst it does get briefly referenced in Peace Walker, due to the game not being written or directed by Kojima, it's sometimes been omitted as part of the overarching Metal Gear story in a similar manner to the NES versions of Metal Gear 1 and 2. Whilst this game wasn't the first Metal Gear game on handhelds, it was the first to bring the gameplay style of the console entries to them, featuring missions which consist of controlling a team of up to 4 operatives, each with varying strengths and weaknesses, in order to complete various missions, with the game also featuring a Wi-Fi based multiplayer mode based off of the one featured in Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. Portable Ops managed to review fairly well, with it doing good enough to get a standalone expansion with Portable Ops Plus, which featured a brand new infinite mission mode along with a higher focus on the multiplayer. Likely due to this game's debatable canonicity, along with a lot of its thunder being taken by its much more popular follow-up, there's not much from Portable Ops. The only thing taken being the music track Calling to the Night, which served as the game's credits theme. Releasing in 2008, Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots served as both the series' debut on the PlayStation 3 as well as the chronological endpoint of the series, being set in 2014 where the war economy has caused the world to plunge into constant never-ending battles. The game following a Snake who, due to rapid aging, is now an old man and has been estimated to only have 1 year left to live, with him being brought out to do one last mission to assassinate Liquid Ocelot, who now runs the 5 largest private military companies in the world via the mother company Outer Heaven. Like the previous mainline MGS games, Metal Gear Solid 4 was met with near universal acclaim, being lauded for its incredible visuals for the time, along with being a satisfying conclusion to the series, as well as the character of Solid Snake. The only major criticism the game ever getting being a potential over-utilization of cutscenes, it rather infamously holding the record for the longest cutscene in a video game at 71 minutes, along with its stance as the series ending and fairly complex narrative making it harder to approach for newcomers, with the game overall managing to sell over 6 million copies, making it the 6th best-selling PS3 game. Despite technically being the grand finale to the Metal Gear saga, there's actually not much from Metal Gear Solid 4. To begin, we have a music track with a Brawl remix of Theme of Love, which was prominently used in the game's E3 2006 trailer. is Spirit number 771, Gecko, a 1-slot advanced support spirit with the effect Jump Up. Large, unmanned autonomous weapons used by the United States military for ground combat, which were made with similar technology to both the Metal Gear Rex and Ray, albeit without the nuclear launch capabilities of actual Metal Gear units, with Snake encountering multiple geckos throughout the game. Returning to the PSP, we have 2010's Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which, like Portable Ops, is set after the events of Snake Eater and seeks to explain the events that led to the founding of Outer Heaven, though this time around Peace Walker is officially recognized as canon thanks to Kojima both writing and directing it. The game being set in 1974, or 10 years after Snake Eater, with Big Boss being requested to save the country of Costa Rica from an unknown armed force via the use of his private military company, Militaire Sans Frontières, or MSF for short. With gameplay being split into a mix of both regular missions, where you have to infiltrate an enemy base or fight a boss, as well as an army management mode based upon the briefing screen from Portable Ops. Peace Walker easily stands as the most popular handheld entry in the series, likely thanks to it being the only one that's indisputably canon and to be made available on home consoles via the Metal Gear Solid HD collection, with the original PSP release managing to sell 1.99 million copies, making it the handheld's 12th best-selling game. Thanks to that legacy, we have a good amount of content from Peace Walker. First, we have a music track with the game's main theme, which plays during the intro and the Peace Walker boss fight. In addition, there's 3 spirits. Number 767, Paz Ortega Andreda, a 1-slot advanced support spirit which lets you start the battle with a bob-omb. A 16-year-old Costa Rican high school student who, alongside her professor, reached out for the MSF's help to repel an unknown armed force that had invaded their country, effectively making them the people responsible for Big Boss getting involved and in turn kicking off the game's plot. Number 768, Strangelove, a 1-slot novice support spirit which lets you start the battle with a Rage Blaster, an AI research scientist responsible for creating the Mammal Pod AI for the Peace Walker project, with her holding hatred for Big Boss due to him killing the boss, as she refuses to believe she truly betrayed her country for the Soviet Union. And number 772, Metal Gear Zeke, a 1-slot novice primary shield spirit which can be enhanced at level 99. A Metal Gear unit that was commissioned by Big Boss for use by Militaire Sans Frontières, the machine having been designed by a mix of Huey Emmerich and Strangelove, with it being made from various salvaged AI weapons from the Peace Walker project due to the MSF's lack of a defense budget. Now we have what is currently the last mainline entry in the series, with Metal Gear Solid V: The Phantom Pain, which was released in 2015 for the PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and PC, with the game continuing the story of Peace Walker, being set in 1984 and seeing Big Boss traverse Soviet-occupied Afghanistan to bring down the covert support unit XOF and their leader Skullface for destroying the home base of the MSF, along the way building up a brand new private military company called Diamond Dogs. Metal Gear Solid V is often viewed as having some of the best gameplay in the series, featuring missions with a more open world styled structure, allowing players to complete the various tasks in a near infinite amount of ways, but is also viewed as having one of the weakest narratives, at least out of the mainline numbered Metal Gear Solid games, with it ultimately being viewed as one of the best stealth games of all time. time, though a lot of this ended up being overshadowed on release by a large-scale controversy the game got caught in the center of between Konami and Kojima, where, likely in response to the game going way over budget, an incredibly lengthy development which ultimately led to the game's prologue having to be sold as a completely separate game titled Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, and tensions having built up between the two parties for potentially years by this point, Konami would quietly remove the names of both Kojima and his in-house team Kojima Productions from promotional material, with the man being set to leave the company in December of 2015 following the release of The Phantom Pain, with that deadline ultimately leading to a lot of cut content, including the entire third act of the story, with him then immediately founding a brand new Kojima Productions as an independent studio, which would release their first game in 2019 with Death Stranding. Potentially due to this overwhelming negativity that can surround discussion of the game, there's not much from Metal Gear Solid 5. The only things taken being two spirits. Number 763, Revolver Ocelot, Metal Gear Solid 5. A 2-slot ace primary grab spirit with the effect shooting attack up. Ocelot ends up helping save Venom Snake from the Cypriot hospital at the start of the game, going on to help him in his mission to save Miller and being a key member of Diamond Dogs. And number 773, Salanthropus, a 1-slot ace primary shield spirit with the effect Metal and Giant, a Metal Gear utilized by XOF, designed by Huey Emmerich and funded by the Soviet Union, which due to its rushed design can only be piloted by a child as the cockpit was meant to house an AI pod. The bipedal tank's end goal being that Skullface would use it as a marketing tool as part of his scheme of arming the entire world with and holding a monopoly over nuclear weaponry. And that's everything from the Metal Gear series. For the overall rankings of representation, Metal Gear stands as the 23rd most represented franchise in Smash, placing above ARMS but below Pikmin, with it also standing as the 6th most represented third-party series, sat behind Capcom's Mega Man and Street Fighter, Bandai Namco's Tekken, Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog, and Konami's own Castlevania. Speaking of which, I think it's about time we start our dark trek through our next franchise for today with Castlevania. Releasing in 1986, Akumojo Dracula, or Devil's Castle Dracula, is a 2D platformer that was made for both the Famicom Disk System and MSX2 computers. The game following the vampire hunter, Simon Belmont, fighting his way through Dracula's castle in order to fulfill his family's vow to vanquish the Dark Lord to stop him from drinking the blood of all humanity, with the monsters he battles and locations he travels through taking heavy inspiration from classic horror movies, particularly 1930s Universal monster movies, which in turn were based on creatures originating from European mythology and classic Gothic literature. The game proved to be very popular, with the Disk System game eventually seeing a cartridge conversion for release in America and Europe, though due to some discomfort over the original title's religious connotations, the international release would be renamed to Castlevania, with the European release of the MSX2 version also getting renamed to Vampire Killer. Whilst the MSX2 version has been mostly forgotten, Castlevania is often considered to be a stapled classic of the NES's library, primarily thanks to it being one of the first big platformers for the system, with the game having seen multiple re-releases and reimaginings in the years since, some of which we'll be discussing later. Continuing the usual pattern for first entries, there is a lot of content from the original Castlevania. First is fighter number 66, Simon, a member of a long lineage of vampire hunters called the Belmont clan, who have been entrusted with the job of slaying Dracula whenever he revives since the 11th century, Simon chronologically being the 5th known member of the clan, with him arguably being the most iconic of the Belmonts due to him being the series' first protagonist, with Simon also fulfilling the same role in Castlevania II Simon's Quest, as well as the various pseudo-remakes of the first game, such as Haunted Castle and Super Castlevania IV. Next is the stage Dracula's Castle, the titular Castlevania that serves as the main setting for the vast majority of entries in the series. The stage specifically being based on the very top of the castle, which usually serves as the place the protagonists have their final battle against Dracula, with the stage also featuring the broken stairway leading to Dracula's quarters, with a clock tower being visible in the background, which is a recurring stage setting through the various incarnations of the castle. Around the stage, it's possible to spot candles which can be destroyed to gain items, matching how they work in the games to supply weapons, healing items, or hearts. During the fight, various monsters from across the series will appear in the background, the ones that can appear being a Medusa head, a mummy, a werewolf, the Creature and Igor, Carmilla, and Death. On top of that, whenever the moon in the sky vanishes, a bunch of bats will fly towards Dracula's coffin, at which point there'll be a flash of lightning revealing the shadow of Dracula himself, or on odd occasions, the shadow of Kid Dracula. Then we have 6 music tracks, with 2 versions of Vampire Killer, the Stage 1 theme, with a new remix for Ultimate, and an arrangement from the spin-off fighting game Castlevania Judgment. A new remix which combines Starker, the Stage 2 theme, and Wicked Child, the Stage 3 theme. Remix of Out of Time, the Stage 6 theme. Nothing to Lose, which plays during the first phase of the final boss fight against Dracula, smashed using a remix from the crossover multiplayer game Castlevania Harmony of Despair. And Black Knight, the song used for the second phase of the final boss fight, with Smash using a remix from the light gun game Castlevania the Arcade. that is the item Death's Scythe, the iconic weapon of the series' recurring boss, Death, which reaps the souls of those it slashes. In Smash, it typically functions like any other battering item, but if it hits an opponent with a smash or tilt attack above a certain damage threshold, it will instantly KO the opponent. After that is the boss Dracula, the main antagonist of the majority of the games, with him serving as the boss for the Dracula's Castle dungeon as part of the Dark Realm in World of Light, as well as Luigi, Pac-Man, Simon, Richter, and Sephiroth's classic mode routes. His appearance being based on his design from Symphony of the Night, with his moveset taking inspiration from his various boss fights from across the series, with the battle being split into two phases. During the first phase, Dracula will teleport around the stage, with the only part of his body that will take damage being his head. His attacks consisting of firing 3 fireballs from his cape, which has been part of his moveset since Castlevania 1, shooting a series of dark fireballs that alternate between just above ground and Dracula's height, which comes from Rondo of Blood, releasing a wave of blue and red coloured orbs that either rotate around him, matching a move used by Graham Jones in Aria of Sorrow, or travel in a straight line in all directions, which is based on his main attack from Castlevania The Adventure, creating pillars of fire from the floor, which resembles his main attack from Dracula's Curse, Dario's fire pillars from Dawn of Sorrow, and one of Dracula's attacks in Harmony of Despair, and transforming into a swarm of bats before dashing across the stage dealing darkness damage, which comes from Portrait of Ruin. When his health bar is depleted, Dracula will transform into a large winged green demon, which like his human form is mainly based on the opening fight from Symphony of the Night. His attacks now consisting of shooting a series of spirits which will home in on the player, originating from Portrait of Ruin, firing 3 explosive projectiles, which is based off his 3-way fire projectile from the first phase, spitting an electric wave, which comes from his battle in Rondo of Blood, swiping his claws, with the last hit doing darkness damage, an overhead swing which meteors and does darkness damage, and jumping into the air, damaging fires on the way down, with him also being able to slam the ground with his fist after jumping to create shockwaves. Finally, there's 7 spirits. Number 1050, Simon Belmont, a fighter spirit. The artwork is taken from Castlevania Grimoire of Souls, a crossover game released exclusively for iOS and Macintosh via Apple Arcade, which follows Alucard under the persona of Genya Arikado, having to explore and destroy the overflowing dark power emanating from grimoires containing the information of all previous events of Castlevania, Simon serving as one of the game's playable characters. Number 1068, Medusa Head, a 1-slot advanced support spirit with the effect Air Defense Up, a recurring enemy in the series which first appears in the second stage, which flies in from off-screen in an oscillating pattern. The monster is based off of the Gorgon, a monster from Greek mythology typically depicted as a woman whose hair is a nest of snakes, with them sometimes also having a snake-like body, with Medusa standing as the most well-known Gorgon due to being the monster featured in the story of Perseus, with her death from getting decapitated by the hero being the reason behind the monster's appearance as a floating head. The spirit art is original to Smash Ultimate. Number 1069, Mummy, a 1-slot advanced primary grab spirit with the effect Speed Down. The boss of Stage 3, which consists of 2 mummies walking back and forth while shooting bandages at Simon, with them going on to appear in multiple other entries, usually as a boss. Mummification was a form of embalming a corpse primarily used by ancient Egyptians, which consisted of removing the body's organs, leaving it to dry out, and then wrapping it with linen binds, with the special method of preserving the dead becoming a household monster when one was made the antagonist of a series of Universal horror movies starring with 1932's The Mummy. The artwork is original to Smash Ultimate. Number 1070, The Creature and Flea Man, a 1-slot advanced support spirit with the effect Poison Damage Reduced, a team-up of monsters that serve as the boss for Stage 4, the creature slowly walking around whilst the Flea Man jumps around shooting projectiles, with the pair having made appearances throughout the series, even if they aren't paired up all the time. Both monsters are based on characters from the classic gothic horror novel Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley and originally released in 1818, which follows the titular Dr. Frankenstein creating a living being out of the bodies of multiple dead people. townspeople, the creature being based off of the monster Frankenstein creates, primarily taking inspiration from the iconic design used in the 1930s Universal movie, with the Flea Man being based on Igor, the deformed hunchback lab assistant to Frankenstein, who was created for the earliest known play adaptation of the book before being popularized by the Universal movie, albeit in those adaptations he's actually called Fritz, with Igor being the name of a similar character that debuted in the third film in the Universal series, Son of Frankenstein. Their art is original to Smash Ultimate. Number 1071, Death, a 2-slot ace support spirit with the effect KO's heal damage. The boss of stage 5, which flies around shooting scythe projectiles at Simon, with him often appearing as a major antagonist through the series as one of Dracula's most loyal and high-ranking servants. Personifications of death exist across nearly every religion and mythology in existence, though Castlevania's is primarily based on Western European interpretations, which usually depict death as a skeleton, sometimes wearing a dark hooded robe, that wields a scythe that reaps the souls of the deceased and dying, with this iteration often being referred to as the Grim Reaper, the term being popularized by late 1800s English literature, with the earliest known appearance of the name in English being the 1847 book The Circle of Human Life. His spirit art is original to Smash Ultimate. Number 1075, Dracula, a 3-slot ace primary neutral spirit which can be enhanced at level 99. The main antagonist and final boss for the vast majority of games throughout the series, for across the greater overarching story of the series, Dracula was originally a human called Matthias Kronqvist, who fell into madness following the death of his wife Elisabetha, with him becoming a vampire using the power of the Crimson Stone, using his newfound powers to wage war against humanity over the span of hundreds of years. Dracula is based on the antagonist of the 1897 gothic horror novel of the same name, which was written by Bram Stoker, the character setting himself apart from the original depiction of vampires within Eastern European folklore by being handsome and charismatic, as opposed to repulsive and corpse-like, with it also often being believed that parts of his character were based on a mix of the 15th century Wallachian prince, Vlad the Impaler, and English stage actor Henry Irving, with Count Dracula standing as the definitive inspiration for most modern interpretations of the vampire. His artwork is taken from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where he acts as the boss for the opening section where you play as Richter, and the true final boss fought at the end of the inverted castle. And number 1077, Dracula Second Form, a 2-slot ace support spirit with the effect Unflinching Charged Smashes. Throughout the series, Dracula possesses the power to shapeshift into various forms, with a good amount of his boss fights having him transform into some kind of giant monster, which is based on how in a lot of depictions of vampires, they're able to transform into various animals, most famously bats, with this being a more extreme variation of that. The artwork is original to Smash Ultimate, where its look is primarily based on the transformation used for the second phase of the intro stage Dracula fight from Symphony of the Night. Releasing just 1 year later, also on the NES, Castlevania II Simon's Quest follows the titular vampire hunter, 7 years after the events of the first game, having to explore the land and gather up 5 parts of Dracula's body so that he can bring them to the Dark Lord's castle to burn them in order to escape a curse that was put on him when he initially vanquished the monster, along the way fighting off the remnants of his followers that are once again ravaging the various towns across Transylvania. Simon's Quest ended up taking on a more RPG-like approach compared to the original game, having you explore a fully open area with various towns dotted around, with you needing the tips of the local townspeople to figure out what you need to do to find the 5 manors where Dracula's body parts are located, all the while having to deal with a day-night cycle where the monsters you battle become stronger during the night. Simon's Quest does tend to get a lot more criticism when compared to the other older entries in the series, mainly due to a mix of the radical shift in gameplay, a general level of jankiness that's not as prominent in the other games, and the incredibly cryptic hints the townspeople give, some of which were arguably made worse in the English localization, making it borderline impossible for some people to figure out what you're even supposed to do to progress, without some kind of guide. Though most of these criticisms mainly came about through hindsight, with it actually receiving a good amount of praise when it initially released, and whilst the RPG elements were soon updated abandoned for most games that came out directly afterwards, they would serve as inspiration for much later entries which put a higher emphasis on exploration. Since this game is still an important part of Castlevania's early days, there's still a decent amount of content from Simon's Quest, despite its more negative reputation. To start off, we have 2 music tracks, with a new remix that combines the daytime and nighttime themes, Bloody Tears and Monster Dance. As well as Dwelling of Doom, the mansion theme. In addition, there's 2 spirits, both of which have artwork that's original to Smash Ultimate. Number 1072, Carmilla, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Fire/Explosion Resist Up. One of the game's 3 bosses who is a female vampire that takes the form of a giant ballroom mask which attacks by shooting bloody tears from one of the mask's eyes. Carmilla is based on the monster from a gothic novella of the same name written by Irish writer Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, which was first published as a serial narrative in 1871, with the Carmilla in the original story being a female vampire that exclusively preyed on women and would hide her identity from potential victims by taking advantage of the anonymity of masquerade balls, this being the inspiration behind the ball mask design used in Simon's Quest, with her appearance in later games typically being a demonic woman riding atop a giant skull. And number 1073, Werewolf, a 1-slot advanced support spirit with the effect Dash Attack Up, an enemy that appears in Jova Woods, which walks slowly before jumping up and down when Simon gets close to them, with the monster becoming harder to kill at nighttime, with werewolves becoming a frequent enemy throughout the series, with it even sometimes being a boss. The mythology of werewolves dates as far back as ancient Greece, being humans that transform into wolf-like monsters typically due to some kind of curse or affliction, the monster becoming a staple of European folklore during the medieval period, with their frequent appearances alongside vampires originating from Bram Stoker's Dracula, stating that the story's villain was directly responsible for the existence of werewolves. In 1987, Haunted Castle would release exclusively in arcades, with Konami advertising it as the ultimate way to play Castlevania, which is a bit odd given it wasn't even supposed to be a Castlevania game originally, but instead, during the game's very troubled development, it was decided to reskin what was an original title to be a Castlevania game, with it also featuring completely different level layouts, along with the story being changed slightly to have Simon raiding the castle in order to save his bride Selena, who is kidnapped by Dracula during their wedding. Overall, despite the claims by Konami's marketing department, Haunted Castle is often viewed by fans as one of the worst games in the series, primarily due to a mix of the large character sprite making Simon an easy target for enemies and hazards, poor hit detection making it hard to kill enemies, and its brutal difficulty, with it also underperforming in arcades, which is likely why it didn't see a home release until 2006 on the PlayStation 2. Though despite this very poor reception, the game does still get acknowledged in later entries, primarily through its soundtrack, with it fairly recently getting a full-blown remake as part of the Castlevania Dominus collection. Given this game's overwhelmingly negative reception, along with the fact that KONAMI tends to view it as just an arcade version of Castlevania 1, there's not much from Haunted Castle. The only things taken being 2 music tracks, with a new remix of Cross Your Heart, the Stage 1 theme, and Harmony of Despair's rendition of Can't Wait Until Night, the Stage 6 theme. Serving as the finale to the NES trilogy, Castlevania III Dracula's Curse would release for the platform in 1989, with it actually being a prequel set in 1476, or just over 200 years before the events of the first game, with it following one of Simon's ancestors, named Trevor Belmont, complete his own quest to travel across the cursed countrysides of Transylvania in an attempt to kill Dracula. Dracula's Curse returned to the more straightforward platformer design of Castlevania 1, with the main change-up being a layer of non-linearity, as throughout the game you'll occasionally be given the option to take one of 2 different pathways, changing up the stages you go through on your way to Dracula, with it also being possible to encounter up to 3 partner characters, each of which possess unique abilities and can be freely switched to during a stage. The only limitations being that you have to have one partner character at a time, you have to keep Trevor throughout the game, and due to where each one is found, it's impossible to encounter all 3 of them in one playthrough. Due to these factors and more, Castlevania 3 is often considered to be the best game out of the NES trilogy, the only real criticism the game got being its high difficulty, with it often being regarded as one of the hardest games for the system. Because of that legacy and the frequent references to it in later entries, there's a good amount of content from Dracula's Curse. To begin, we have 3 music tracks, with a new remix of Beginning, the town stage theme, Judgment's rendition of Mad Forest, the Forest stage theme, and a new remix of Aquarius, the Sunken City stage theme. Next is the assist trophy Alucard, the half-human son of Dracula who can be fought and then recruited by Trevor in his quest, with his appearance as an assist trophy being based on his more prominent role as the main protagonist of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. When summoned, Alucard will attack opponents with the Chrysogrim, the best sword weapon in Symphony, a charging move called Wing Smash via the Soul of Bass transformation, and a downward aerial move called the Jump Kick, along with being able to dodge attacks with the Backdash and Power of Mist transformation. Finally, there's two spirits. Number 1052, Trevor C. Belmont, a 3-slot Legend Primary Shield spirit, Castlevania III's main protagonist and the second known member of the Belmont clan. Trevor having lived outside of society due to their fear of the Belmont clan's supernatural powers, with him effectively being humanity's last resort to stopping Dracula. The spirit art is taken from Castlevania Curse of Darkness, which is set 3 years after Dracula's curse, where Trevor takes on the role of a supporting character, running into and briefly fighting the game's main protagonist Hector after mistaking him for the Devil Forge Master Isaac. And number 1055, Alucard, a 3-slot Legend Primary Shield spirit with the effect Sword Attack Up. As mentioned earlier, Alucard is the half-human son of Dracula who ended up deciding to go against his father, following the dying request of his mother Lisa to not take his anger out by killing humans, leading him to side with Trevor to defeat Dracula. His spirit art is taken from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where after an over 300-year-long slumber, he awakens to investigate Dracula's castle once again returning, with no Belmont being present to stop his father, with Alucard taking the role of the game's main protagonist. Releasing exclusively in Japan for the Famicom in 1990, Kid Dracula is a platformer starring Dracula's son, who sets out to take vengeance on the monsters attempting to steal his throne as the Demon King, with the whole thing effectively being Konami making an over-the-top cutesy parody of Castlevania. Whilst the original game would never leave Japan, a kind of sequel, kind of remake, which released for the Game Boy in 1993, would come out across all regions. And despite not being canon, there have been a few nods to it in some of the mainline entries. As this is more of a light-hearted joke game, as well as one that's not too well known outside Japan, not much was actually brought over from Kid Dracula. The only thing taken being spirit number 1078, Kid Dracula, a 2-slot Ace Primary Grab spirit with the effect Jump Up, the 10,009-year-old son of Dracula and self-proclaimed Demon King who serves as the main protagonist, the game following him awakening from his slumber only to have his throne be challenged by the demon Galamoth, with the character also appearing in a few other Konami games, most notably as a playable character in the 3rd and 4th entries in the Parodius series, which similarly is a comedic parody of Gradius. Serving as the series' debut on 16-bit systems, Super Castlevania IV released in 1991 exclusively for the Super Nintendo. But despite what you might think from the title, the game isn't actually a sequel, and is more so just a SNES reimagining of Castlevania 1. Whilst the story is almost identical to the first entry, it features a completely different soundtrack and level design, in addition to a few new quality of life improvements to the gameplay. The most noticeable being Simon can now be controlled in mid-air somewhat after a jump, and he can now swing his whip in 8 directions, along with being able to flail it around if the attack button is held down. Similar to how Castlevania 1 is viewed as an all-time classic NES title, Castlevania 4 is viewed as a classic of the Super Nintendo's library, with it sometimes being viewed as the most popular title from the series' early days, and the best way to experience the story of the first game. There's not much content from Super Castlevania IV, likely due to it being another rendition of Castlevania 1, similar to the previously discussed Haunted Castle. The only things taken being 2 music tracks with 2 versions of Simon Belmont's theme, which plays during the first stage and the final boss fight, with both the original song a rendition from Castlevania the Arcade. Continuing with the 16-bit consoles, Castlevania Rondo of Blood released in 1993 only in Japan as an exclusive for the Super CD-ROM, a CD-based add-on for the NEC PC engine, better known internationally as the TurboGrafx-16. The game taking place in 1792, or 100 years after the events of Castlevania 1, with Dracula once again resurrecting, with his army kidnapping various women, one of whom happens to be the fiancé of the most recent descendant of the Belmont clan, Richter Belmont. Whilst Rondo of Blood wasn't too much of a radical shake-up from previous titles, each playthrough consisting of 9 stages, with a few secret alternate stages for replayability, it is still considered to be a pretty solid game, and one of the better titles for the system. And whilst regions outside Japan didn't get it originally, a Super Nintendo version, which featured completely remixed levels titled Castlevania Dracula X, or Castlevania Vampire's Kiss in Power Regions, would see a worldwide release in 1995 and 96, with Rondo of Blood also getting a full-blown remake for the PSP in 2007 under the title Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles, with it also including ports of both the original PC Engine game and its direct sequel that we'll discuss later. Since Rondo of Blood is a decently popular entry, there's a good amount of content from this game. First, we have fighter number 66 Echo, Richter, Rondo of Blood's main protagonist, who is chronologically the 7th known member of the Belmont clan, who enters the castle to kill Dracula, both due to his lineage's duty to vanquish the Dark Lord and to save both his fiancée Annette and a few other women who were kidnapped by Dracula's army as part of an attack on Anna's hometown of Aljabar. Next is 3 music tracks, with a new remix of Divine Bloodlines, the Stage 1 theme, Despair's version of Slash, the theme for Alternate Stage 4, Judgment's rendition of Dance of Illusions, which plays during the final boss fight against Dracula. finally, there's 3 spirits. Number 1051, Richter Belmont, a fighter spirit. In addition to Rondo of Blood, Richter also appears as a supporting character in Symphony of the Night, with the game's intro being a recreation of his battle against Dracula at the end of Rondo of Blood, with the spirit art coming from the Dracula X Chronicles, the PSP remake of Rondo of Blood. Number 1053, Maria Renard, a 2-slot advanced primary grab spirit which can be enhanced at level 99. A young girl who is a distant descendant of the Belmont clan and like them is also a vampire hunter, with her being one of the girls who gets captured and brought to Dracula's castle by his army, and after being saved by Richter, teams up with him to take down Dracula. Her artwork is from Harmony of Despair, where she was one of the game's DLC characters, possessing the unique ability of fighting using the incarnations of the 4 Chinese seasonal gods. And number 1074, Shaft, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Magic Attack Up, the dark priest responsible for Dracula's resurrection, with him kidnapping women to serve as a potential bride for his Dark Lord, along with being the boss of Stage 6, where he summons 4 bosses from the original Castlevania to fight for him. His artwork is taken from Symphony of the Night, where he kidnaps and brainwashes Richter, making the strongest vampire hunter a servant of Dracula to stop anyone else from interfering. For our last 16-bit game, we have 1994's Castlevania Bloodlines, or Castlevania The New Generation in Power Regions, which was released exclusively for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, taking place in 1917 or 125 years after Rondo of Blood. This time seeing Elizabeth Bartley, the niece of Dracula, kickstarting the events that would lead to the First World War in order to use the lost souls and mass chaos to resurrect her uncle, with it being up to 2 men to stop her: Jonathan Morris, a distant descendant of the Belmont clan, and Eric Lacard, whose girlfriend was kidnapped and vampirized by Elizabeth, the pair working together in the hopes of taking her down before Dracula can be revived again. Castlevania Bloodlines generally received a pretty positive reception, though it also tends to be a pretty overlooked title, likely due to the fact that this was the only entry in the series that was exclusive to what was viewed as the direct competitor to Nintendo. The platform holder Castlevania was the most popular and well established on at the time, meaning it's likely a lot of people missed this game when it came out because most people who were Castlevania fans likely didn't own a Genesis. Potentially due to it arguably being one of the more obscure Castlevania games, there's not much from Bloodlines, the only thing taken being a music track, with a new remix of Iron Blue Intention, the theme for Stage 4. Serving as the series' debut on 32-bit systems, Castlevania Symphony of the Night initially released as an exclusive for the PlayStation in 1997, with it later getting an expanded Sega Saturn version exclusive to Japan in 1998. Serving as a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood, taking place 5 years after the events of that game, it sees Alucard awaken from his centuries-long slumber to find that Dracula's castle has risen once again, but no one from the Belmont Goemon clan has risen to the challenge, with Richter having disappeared some time ago, leading Alucard to enter the castle to investigate what happened. The game saw a fairly radical shift in gameplay, where instead of a linear set of levels with some split paths, instead gave you full reign to freely explore all of the castle at your own pace, finding items, gear, and weapons along the way, which makes your traversal of the castle easier and allows you to explore new areas you might have missed on a first run through, with it also reintroducing a lot of the RPG-like mechanics from Simon's Quest. Whilst initial sales of the game were fairly lackluster, thanks to the overwhelming amount of praise the game got from critics and general positive word of mouth, it eventually became a sleeper hit for the PlayStation, with it often being considered to be one of the best games in the series, defining the general structure for most Castlevania games that released afterwards, as well as being credited alongside Nintendo's Super Metroid for popularizing the Metroidvania subgenre of platformers. Thanks to that legacy, there's a good amount of content from Symphony of the Night. First, we have 4 music tracks, with Judgment's rendition of the theme for the entrance of Dracula's castle, a new remix of Dance of Gold, the theme for the Alchemy Lab area, a new remix of Lost Painting, which plays in the Reverse Caverns, the Ante-Chapel, and the Forbidden Library, and Harmony of Despair's rendition of The Tragic Prince, which plays in the Clock Tower. In addition, there's spirit number 1054, Maria Renard Symphony of the Night, a 2-slot ace primary grab spirit with the effect additional mid-air jump. Throughout the game, Alucard ends up running into a now 17-year-old Maria who is exploring the castle in the hopes of saving Richter after he disappeared, with her being the one who gives him the holy glasses needed to see through the dark illusions. Now we have the series' first foray into 3D with 1999's Castlevania, which, due to releasing as an exclusive for the Nintendo 64, and as a way to better help differentiate it from the original NES game, is usually referred to by the fan name of Castlevania 64. The game isn't part of the overall chronology of the series, instead being a separate non-canonical side story set in the year 1852, following a pair of young vampire hunters entering Dracula's castle after his loyal followers starting kidnapping children across the region, as one is believed to be the new reincarnation of the Dark Lord. Whilst Castlevania 64 did get fairly positive reviews, it's also believed to have been the victim of a rushed development in order to get it out in time for the holiday season, as the game features a lot of cut content, with there also being a good handful of technical issues which seemingly only appear towards the start of the game and progressively get more ironed out as it goes along, with a lot of these issues and cut content later getting fixed as part of an expanded version of the title dubbed Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, which would release towards the end of 1999 and was effectively sold as a special edition or director's cut of Castlevania 64. Likely due to this game being a non-canon entry, on top of being one that is often overlooked due to its fairly rough opening, there's not much from Castlevania 64. The only thing taken being spirit number 1056, Reinhard Schneider, a 3-slot novice primary neutral spirit. One of the game's 2 playable characters, with Reinhard being a descendant of the Belmont clan who ended up building the strong will to prove himself as a warrior due to growing up being teased by classmates who couldn't believe he was related to the Belmonts. His story campaign also appears in Legacy of Darkness, becoming playable after saving Clark in Henry's campaign. Shifting over to handhelds, we have Castlevania Circle of the Moon, which was released in 2001 as a launch title for the Game Boy Advance. And like the previously discussed Castlevania 64, it's treated as more of a separate side story that isn't part of the series' overarching canon, taking place in 1830, where a group of Dracula's followers, led by Camilla, begin to revive Dracula in an abandoned Austrian castle, with vampire hunter Morris Baldwin, alongside his 2 apprentices, heading over to attempt to stop them, only to arrive just too late, with the apprentices being split apart from their leader, the rest of the game following one of them, named Nathan Graves, attempting to scale the castle in order to save his master, fighting Dracula's minions along the way. Circle of the Moon would receive praise for bringing Symphony of the Night's formula to handhelds, along with its brand new dual setup system, where you can combine 2 magic cards, one for the action and one for the attribute, to perform dozens of spells from all the combinations you can do, with the only major sour spot being that the game's dark color scheme made it hard to visually see what was happening due to the GBA screen not being backlit, something that was fixed in later revisions of the handheld. Since this was one of the most successful titles in the series, there's a decent amount of content from Circle of the Moon. To start off, we have a music track with a new remix of Awake, the theme for the Catacomb area. Then there's 2 spirits. Number 1057, Nathan Graves, a 1-slot advanced primary attack spirit. Circle of the Moon's main protagonist, who, after their parents died in a battle against Dracula 10 years prior, was raised and taught how to be a vampire hunter by his parents' friend, Morris Baldwin, with the game seeing him explore an Austrian castle to save Morris after he gets kidnapped during a failed attempt to stop a ritual to summon Dracula. And number 1058, Hugh Baldwin, a 1-slot novice primary attack spirit with the effect Sword Attack Up. Morris's son, who trained to be a vampire hunter alongside Nathan, although he ended up forming a jealousy driven by rivalry with him when Nathan was chosen to inherit the Hunter Whip, despite often dismissing him as being too weak to fight alongside him, requesting Nathan leave the castle while he stays to save Morris at the start of the game. Continuing with the GBA games, we have 2002's Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, which returns to the series' canonical storyline taking place in 1748, or alternatively around both 50 years after Simon's Quest and 44 years before Rondo of Blood, with the game following just Belmont, who ends up in Dracula's castle in pursuit of a childhood friend that's being held captive within. The gameplay saw a slight shift to be more in line with the design of Symphony of the Night, with the main change being a new spin on the magic system where you combine a spell book with a sub-weapon to perform a magic attack that's more effective than the sub-weapon on its own. Whilst the game did get a fairly positive response when it released, albeit with a good amount of people being underwhelmed by its soundtrack, it has seen a fair amount of criticism for the environments and the main character sprites being pretty bad compared to other entries, along with the actual method of traversing the castle being unnecessarily convoluted. Likely due to the game's rather negative perception in recent times, there's not much from Harmony of Dissonance. The only thing taken being spirit number 1059, Just Belmont, a 2-slot advanced primary attack spirit, the main protagonist of Harmony of Dissonance and grandson of Simon Belmont, who possesses magical abilities derived from the Belnades clan, with Just initially setting out to find his kidnapped childhood friend List, eventually finding and then getting chased into an unmarked castle, which is, of course, Dracula's castle, leading him to having to fulfill his family's destiny of destroying evil. To wrap up the GBA trilogy, we have 2003's Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, which takes place over 120 years after the events of Bloodlines in 2035, at a point in time where Dracula has long since been permanently defeated following a large-scale war in 1999. The game following high school exchange student Soma Cruz, who whilst visiting the Hakuba Shrine with his childhood friend and the Shrine Master's daughter, Mina Hakuba, ends up being teleported to Dracula's castle during a solar eclipse, with him being given no other option but to explore the castle in the hopes of finding a way back home. Whilst the game reportedly sold poorly in Japan, it did really well in the US, with it often being considered to easily be the best GBA entry for the series, some even going as far as to say it was the best one since Symphony of the Night, a highlight being the new tactical soul system, whereby absorbing enemy souls, the player gains access to unique abilities based on the soul absorbed, with almost every single enemy in the game having a unique soul. Due to this positive reception, there's a decent amount of content from Aria of Sorrow. To begin, we have a music track with Harmony of Despair's rendition of Ruined Castle Gallery, which plays in the castle corridor area. In addition, there's 3 spirits, all of which take their artwork from Harmony of Despair. Number 1060, Yoko Bellnades, a 1-slot advanced support spirit with the effect battering items up. A descendant of the Bellnade clan, magic users who have supported the Belmonts in their quest to kill Dracula, who is investigating the castle in order to help the church's hunt for Dracula and his remaining power, running into and providing aid to Soma a few times throughout the game. Number 1062, Julius Belmont, a 1-slot ace support spirit with the effect side special up. The chronologically last known descendant of the Belmont clan, who was part of the Great Demon War of 1999, managing to finally slay Dracula permanently, but as a consequence ended up developing amnesia, only being able to remember that his name starts with a J, with him returning to the castle due to a hidden intuition that it may give him the clues to remember who he is. And number 1076, Soma Cruz, a 3-slot legend primary neutral spirit with the effect Giant Killer. The main protagonist of Aria of Sorrow, as well as its direct continuation, Dawn of Sorrow, who ends up being teleported to Dracula's castle with his childhood friend Mina, with him deciding to explore the castle to find a way for them to escape, along the way discovering he possesses the power of dominance, the ability to steal a lifeform's soul and bend it to his will, a power that once belonged to Dracula himself. Returning to home consoles, we have Castlevania Lament of Innocence, which released exclusively for the PlayStation 2 in 2003, and is chronologically the earliest point in the series, being set in 1094, or 382 years before Dracula's curse, and effectively following the events that would lead to the millennia-spanning conflict between Dracula and the Belmont clan, with the game being the next attempt at a 3D entry after 64, with the game having you explore 5 separate areas of the castle, with you being able to go to the final section after defeating the boss of each area. And unlike past games, there's no experience point system, with you learning new abilities by completing certain tasks or repeating specific actions a set number of times. Lament of Innocence would get generally positive reviews, praising the game for doing a better job at translating the Castlevania formula to 3D when compared to the N64 games, though there were complaints over some of the backtracking and lacking the complexity of combat found in other action games at the time, like Devil May Cry. Despite this being both the chronological start point of the series and arguably the most popular 3D entry, there's only a little bit taken from Lament of Innocence. First, we have a music track with a new remix of Lament of Innocence, which serves as Leon Belmont's theme, with it first playing when they reach the 2nd floor of the Pagoda of the Misty Moon. On top of that is spirit number 1061, Leon Belmont, a 1-slot advanced primary grab spirit, the main protagonist of Lament of Innocence and the earliest known member of the Belmont clan, starting the family's long tradition of hunting evil when his fiancée was kidnapped by the vampire Walter Bernard, storming his castle with the Whip of Alchemy, the same whip which would be passed down to later Belmonts under the name Vampire Killer. Moving on to Nintendo's next line of handhelds with the Nintendo DS, we have 2005's Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, which served as a direct sequel to Aria of Sorrow, being set 1 year later in 2036, which sees Soma Cruz take on a cult named With Light, who wish to kill him and revive Dracula, as they believe he's a necessary ultimate evil that must exist for there to be an ultimate good. Soma deciding to invade a castle the cult built to halt the ritual for Dracula's return. Similar to its GBA predecessor, Dawn of Sorrow saw a lot of praise, and upon release was seen as one of the best games for the DS, with the new spin on the tactical soul system, where you can upgrade abilities by getting multiple of the same soul, though the moments where the player is required to use the touchscreen to complete certain tasks did come across as unnecessarily gimmicky to some. There's not much taken from Dawn of Sorrow, likely due to a lot of the game's DNA being copied over from its predecessor, with the only things taken being 2 music tracks. Jet Black Incursion, the theme for the Lost Village area, and Harmony of Despair's rendition of Crash in the Dark Knight, which plays during the boss fights against the Puppet Master, Gurgoth, Zephyr, and Paranoia. Going back to home consoles, Castlevania Curse of Darkness released in 2005 for both the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox, this being the first entry in the series to release on Microsoft's line of systems. The game serving as a direct sequel to Dracula's Curse, taking place in 1479, or 3 years after Trevor Belmont defeated Dracula, with it following a Devil Forge master named Hector that used to work in Dracula's army, getting lured back to the abandoned castle in pursuit of another former Devil Forge master. Curse of Darkness featured similar gameplay to Lament of Innocence, with the main change-ups being that instead of the castle being split into definitive hub worlds, it features a more complete castle map, although most of the game is actually spent in areas surrounding the castle, with Hector being able to use his Devil Forgery skills to get assistance from innocent devils. Curse of Darkness would end up getting fairly mixed reviews, getting praise for its gameplay, but a good amount of criticism for rather dull environments, with some also feeling the level design was fairly monotonous. Likely due to its mixed reception, not much was taken from Curse of Darkness. The only thing taken being Spirit number 1063, Hector, a 1-slot advanced support spirit which lets you start the battle with Death's Scythe. Curse of Darkness's main protagonist, who was a former general for Dracula, that eventually decided to leave him due to not wanting to kill humans, ultimately leading to Dracula's defeat at the hands of Trevor Belmont, with the game seeing him lured back to Dracula's castle 3 years later to get revenge on another former general named Isaac after he caused the death of Hector's wife Rosalie. Returning to the DS, we have 2006's Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, which is set in 1944 and serves as a direct continuation of Bloodlines, it following vampire hunter Jonathan Morris and young sorceress Charlotte Owlin as they work together to stop the vampire artist Brawner after he brings back Dracula's castle in the hopes of bringing ruin to the world, the pair needing to enter paintings he made around the castle in order to destroy the evil within and weaken his power. Portrait of Ruin was met with a very positive reception, with there being a good amount of praise for the gameplay, which allows you to freely switch between both pro tags at any time, in addition to special combo attacks which have both characters working together, with the paintings allowing for more unique environments that otherwise didn't fit the usual theme of a haunted castle. As this game saw similar praise to the previously discussed Dawn of Sorrow, without the issue of a lot of characters or plot points directly crossing over from a previous previous entry, there's a good amount of content from Portrait of Ruin. To start off, we have 3 music tracks, with Harmony of Despair's rendition of Ripped Silence, which plays during the boss fights against the Dullahan, Mummy Man, the Creature, Medusa, Werewolf, and Death. Hail from the Past, the theme for the Sandy Grave area. And Jail of Jewel, the theme for the Great Stairway area. Then there's Two Spirits, both of which take their artwork from Harmony of Despair. Number 1064, Jonathan Morris, a 2-slot ace primary grab spirit, one of the game's 2 protagonists and the son of John Morris, one of the playable characters from Castlevania Bloodlines. Jonathan makes use of various swords and axes as well as the classic whip, although he was never taught how to unlock the full potential of Vampire Killer, causing him to gain animosity towards his father. And number 1065, Charlotte Owlin, a 2-slot advanced primary attack spirit with the effect Magic Attack Up, a young witch and Jonathan's childhood friend that serves as the game's second playable character, with her specializing in using various spells, with her strong prowess in magic causing her to be seen as a potential final weapon in the fight against Dracula. To wrap up the DS trilogy, we have 2008's Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, which is set at some undisclosed time in the early 1800s, putting it somewhere between the events of Symphony of the Night and Bloodlines, with the titular Order of Ecclesia being one of the many organizations that came about as part of efforts to research countermeasures against Dracula, then managing to obtain a triad of magical glyphs said to contain the power to destroy him, called Dominus. The game seeing you play as Order member Shanoa when she's tasked to retrieve the glyphs when they get stolen by a traitorous member of the group. Order of Ecclesia saw generally favourable reviews, seeing a gameplay style that was sort of an in-between of Symphony of the Night and Simon's Quest, with praise being given to its higher difficulty when compared to previous entries and the new glyph system, where Shanoa can gain abilities by absorbing glyphs, being able to equip 3 at a time, with them all requiring MP to use, which automatically recovers over time. Due to this reception, and the fact that this ended up being what is currently the last mainline entry of the original timeline, there's a decent amount of content from Order of Ecclesia. To begin, we have 2 music tracks, both of which are remixes from Harmony of Despair, with Twilight Stigmata, which plays during the opening movie and at the castle entrance, and Jet Black Wings, the theme for the arms depot and the barracks. On top of that is spirit number 1066, Shanoa, a 2-slot ace primary grab spirit. Order of Ecclesia's main protagonist who is able to wield various magical weapons and use spells by absorbing glyphs, with her having been chosen to be the vessel for Dominus. But before the ritual could be performed, her adoptive brother and fellow Order member Albus stole the glyphs and caused Shanoa to lose her memories and emotions, with the game following her journey to recover the glyphs per request of the Order's leader, Barlow. Whilst Castlevania up to this point was a fairly established franchise, Konami were concerned by the fact that the series had been seeing a decline in sales amongst some of the recent entries. So it was decided to take the series in a new direction via a full-on series reboot, in the hopes of reaching a larger audience than previous titles. The end result being Castlevania Lords of Shadow, which released in 2010 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, with it also later receiving a PC port in 2013. Being set in 1047, where the world has been driven to ruin by a malevolent force called the Lords of Shadow, the group preventing the souls of the deceased from being able to move on to the heavens and causing monsters to start inhabiting the dying land and attacking humans. The main line of defense against them being an elite group of holy knights called the Brotherhood of Light, with the story following the quest of one of these knights named Gabriel Belmont. Whilst the game had a fairly split reaction amongst the pre-established fanbase, it ended up getting positive reviews from critics, and it hit the goal Konami wanted, as it ended up becoming the best-selling game in the franchise, leading them to soon after greenlight a 2D side game with Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, which released for the 3DS, Xbox 360, and PS3 in 2013, plus PC in 2014, along with a full-blown sequel with Lords of Shadow 2, also in 2014. Albeit these follow-ups saw a much more mixed reaction, and since then, barring a remake of Haunted Castle that was included as part of a compilation pack, the series hasn't seen a new mainline entry, whether that be part of the original or Lords of Shadow timeline, since 2014. As this is a fairly divisive title amongst fans, along with arguably contributing to Castlevania's eventual downfall, there's not much from Lords of Shadow. The only thing taken being spirit number 1067, Gabriel Belmont, a 3-slot advanced primary neutral spirit, the main protagonist of the Lords of Shadow sub-series, who served as a member of the Brotherhood of Light, with the original game seeing him set out to bring balance to the world and avenge his wife Mary by travelling across the destroyed lands and defeating the evil tyrants, with the end goal of finding the pieces of an item called the God Mask in an attempt to bring her back to life. And with that, we've wrapped up the Castlevania series, which stands as the 13th most represented overall franchise, coming ahead of Splatoon and behind Street Fighter, and the 3rd most represented third-party series, placing only behind Capcom's Mega Man and the previously mentioned Street Fighter. To wrap up, let's take a quick look at 3 minor series in Smash which also belong to Konami. Bomberman is a series of action games which primarily consists of walking around a maze and defeating enemies by placing bombs, making sure you don't accidentally blow yourself up. But the franchise having been created by Hudson Soft, who are otherwise known for series like Adventure Island and Bonk, as well as being the original developers for the Mario Party series, with them eventually being fully acquired and later absorbed into Konami during the early 2010s. The original Bomberman was made in 1980 to serve as a tech demo for Hudson's BASIC compiler, with it later being ported to various Japanese PCs in 1983 and European PCs in 1984, though the game wouldn't truly take off until it was ported to the NES in 1985, with this being the first version of the game to release in America. Since then, in addition to countless renditions and spins on the original game, the series has also seen a few entries which featured a more action-adventure platformer-like single-player campaign, along with spin-offs like puzzle and racing games, with the Bomberman character becoming a mascot for Hudson Soft. Since this is one of the bigger third-party series featured in Smash, along with one that's been frequently requested for playable characters, there's a good amount of content from Bomberman. To start off, we have the assist trophy, Bomberman, the main protagonist of the series, who is sometimes referred to as White Bomberman to better distinguish him from the other Bombermen throughout the series. When summoned, Bomberman will run and jump around the screen, placing bombs which explode in a cross pattern, with it actually being possible for Bomberman to accidentally damage and KO himself with his own bombs, just like how they function in the Bomberman games, with him being able to place both regular bombs that blow up after enough time passes, and remote bombs which will go off when he presses a remote control, with the bomb's explosions also being able to set off any other bombs caught in the blast radius. Next is a Mii Brawler costume, which is also based on Bomberman, with the costume matching the Mii set color, which takes inspiration from the various Bombermen that primarily appear within the game's battle modes. Finally, there's spirit number 1293, Bomberman, a 2-slot ace primary grab spirit. The spirit art is taken from Super Bomberman R, which at the time of Ultimate's release was the most recent entry in the series, not counting the Japan exclusive MOBA spin-off Bomber Girl, and served as a Switch launch title. The game's story seeing Bomberman set out with his siblings to stop Emperor Bugler's hostile takeover of 5 planets in the Starry Sky Nebula. Ganbare Goemon is a long-running series that has been going since 1986, starting with the arcade game Mr. Goemon, which was a side-scrolling platformer inspired by Ishikawa Goemon, a noble thief originating from the 16th century popularized within Japanese folklore. Whilst the series saw a steady stream of games up until 2005, or 2011 if you want to count a couple patchy slot machines, only 5 of them ever saw international releases, which was primarily down to Konami feeling the series was too Japan-centric to realistically do well outside of their home country. The first one to get that treatment being the series debut on the Super Nintendo, which was renamed to The Legend of the Mystical Ninja, with each subsequent entry that got localized being titled Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. As this is a series that hasn't seen a new mainline entry in almost 2 decades, with the vast majority of the games being Japan exclusive, there's not much from Ganbare Goemon. The only thing taken being a Mii Swordfire costume based on the series' main protagonist, Goemon, with its design specifically being based on the classic Goemon look popularized by the Legend of the Mystical Ninja, with the sword being the character's traditional main weapon of a giant smoking pipe. Getsu Fuma Den is an action game which released exclusively in Japan for the Famicom in 1987, taking place in the first year of the Demon Age, where the Demon Lord Ryokatsuki has escaped hell and plans to take over the human world, which is ruled by the 3 Getsu brothers, with the monster managing to kill the 2 older brothers and steal the 3 pulse blades, with it being up to the youngest and only surviving Getsu brother, Fuma, to travel the Demon Lord's home of Kyokito, or Mad Demon Island, to recover the stolen pulse blades, summon the spirits of his deceased brothers, and defeat Ryokatsuki, with gameplay being split between a top-down overworld, 2D platforming action sequences, and 3D third-person dungeon exploration. Whilst the original game never released outside Japan, it would end up getting referenced in a handful of other Konami titles, most notably getting a DLC character and level in Castlevania Harmony of Despair, with it eventually getting a sequel in 2022 for the Nintendo Switch and PC titled Getsu Fuma Den Undying Moon, which in addition to getting a full international release, also saw a shift in gameplay to a hack-and-slash Roguevania. As this is a mostly forgotten title that most people only even know about due to its connections to the much more popular Castlevania series, there's not much from Getsu Fuma Den, the only thing taken being a music track with Castlevania Harmony of Despair's rendition of the original game's overworld theme, Go Getsu Fuma. And with that, we've finished our overview of KONAMI, with Getsu Fuma Den ranking 153rd with 67 other series, Mystical Ninja 109th with 43 other series, and Bomberman 73rd with 14 other series. For the next bunch of episodes, Volume 23 will be covering Splatoon, ARMS, and all the minor series to come from the Switch. Volume 24 will be going over all the franchises to come from Microsoft, and Volume 25 will be on all the remaining third-party companies we haven't covered yet. Until then, feel free to subscribe to the channel to keep up with what's coming up, and otherwise, thanks for watching.